All right, now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce the very first session of today, which is the State Safety Oversight and Rail Transit Agency's effective working relationships. So this session will discuss the authority of the SSOA to oversee the safety of rail, fixed guideway public transportation systems, the policies that govern the activities of the SSOA, the reporting requirements that govern both the SSOA and the rail, fixed guideway public transportation systems, and the steps the SSOA will take to ensure open, ongoing communication between the SSOA and every rail, fixed guideway public transportation system within its oversight. With us today, we have Patrick Nemons, who is the Chief of the Program Management Division in FTA's Office of Safety Review, and he's going to kick off the session. Presenting with Patrick are SSO Program Manager Molly Hughes with the Washington State Department of Transportation and Branden Porter, the Director of Transportation Safety and Security with Sound Transit. So Molly, Branden, we really appreciate having you two joining us so early, because I know it's very early over on the West Coast. And so let's go ahead and let's get started. So Patrick, would you mind kicking us off?
Great, thank you. And thank you, Dr. Ramsey, and good morning to our State Safety Oversight and Rail Transit Agency partners. So welcome again to the 2021 Joint State Safety Oversight and Rail Transit Agency workshop, virtual workshop. We do look forward to seeing you in person in the near future. As Dr. Ramsey said, my name is Patrick Nemons. I am the Chief of the Program Management Division here in the Office of Transit Safety and Oversight. So the sessions that Dr. Ramsey mentioned that we're going to be covering this afternoon or this morning into the afternoon are basically topics and sessions that my team and I have observed through our routine monitoring, through our audits, through our interactions and technical assistance requests from the industry. So we hope that these are informative topics and informative areas. But the first one that I'm going to kick off is the State Safety Oversight and Rail Transit Agency's effective working relationship. Without an effective working relationship, none of the activities would be able to be carried out by the State Safety Oversight Agency or the Rail Transit Agency. And when I say having an effective working relationship, this does not mean that you really have to like one another, but it is important that you have an effective working relationship. So let me just share this. For example, I love my entire family, but honestly, sometimes I don't like them. But you know, as we all do, we make it work. So let me be clear when we talk about this effective working relationship. It's not about the FTA, it's not about the SSOA, and it's not about the RTA. This is about having an effective working relationship so that we can focus on the safety for the transit employees and passengers that you are responsible for. Next slide, please. So in this session, I will cover principles of effective working relationship, safety culture, state safety oversight program relationships, a few authorities and opportunities for relationship building, and ultimately what would be the results. Next slide. So here are the principles of effective relationship. This is based on business industry consultants and what they state are some important aspects for effective working relationships. The first one is trust. Let's talk about that. That's basically just being open and honest about your thoughts and actions. Respect. Value one another's input and find solutions based on collective insight, wisdom, and creativity. Now, I've often hear people say, well, respect is earned. Well, you have to apply things before you can know that you're going to accept that respect. So you got to work at earning the respect and providing the respect. Self-awareness. This is taking responsibility for your words and your actions and not allowing your own negative emotions to impact the people around you. Inclusion. Welcome diverse people and opinions. If someone offers a different opinion than yours, at least consider how you can factor that into the equation for your decision making. And the keystone here is open communication. All good relationships depend on open and honest communication. The more effectively you communicate with those around you, the better you'll connect. Next slide, please. The principles of effective working relationship that I just covered for the purpose of our industry can be incorporated into safety culture. So the trust, the respect, the self-awareness, the inclusion, and the open communication can form shared values. And for safety culture, those shared values, actions, and behaviors can demonstrate your commitment to safety over competing goals and demands. And as you can see here, the principles are ongoing, as should be safety culture. Next slide, please. The State Safety Oversight Program relationship is based on this tier here. Although we are covering the effective working relationship between the State Safety Oversight Agency and the rail transit agencies, it is also important that FTA is part of that effective working relationship. FTA has to work with the State Safety Oversight Agency. State Safety Oversight Agency has to work with the Rail Transit Agency. The Rail Transit Agency has to work with the State Safety Oversight Agency, the State Safety Oversight Agency with the FTA. All in all, it is important that we all work together. Again, the ultimate goal is ensuring the safety of the transit employees and passengers. Next slide, please. Now, we would not be the federal government if we did not tell you what the authorities are or what the rules are. So let me cover some authorities here over the next few slides. So the basic authority here, earlier I talked about the principles of effective working relationship and safety culture. Well, these are not just theory. It is actually outlined in our State Safety Oversight Program rule. Although the SSO program is regulated and has defined requirements, it does not prevent parties from working together on the how to meet these requirements. Basically, what I'm saying is when you have a rule, the rule is the rule, but how you work to get there is what you can do together. And as you see here in this particular rule, in the underlined area here, the State Safety Oversight Agency will make an effort to ensure that there is open and ongoing communication between the state as well as the rail transit agencies and overseas. Next slide. This slide is again another authority slide, and it covers the program standard. A State Safety Oversight Program standard is governed by a State Safety Oversight program is governed by its program standard and requisite documents. The program standard outlines the practices and activities a state will use to execute its oversight. Next slide. Again, authorities for policy. The policies that govern the activities of a State Safety Oversight Agency are rooted in local, state, and federal laws. Policies will develop over time based on a State Safety Oversight's determination, meaning if there was a pattern, practice, or a trend posing a safety risk, the state may address the remedy in its program standard. Next slide. Sticking with the authority, let's talk about reporting requirements. Reporting requirements, I'm referencing things like investigation report, audit report, status reports, or any other reports that your state may deem necessary. So, but in these reporting requirements, a State Safety Oversight Agency must identify upfront and in its program standard requirements and deadlines that apply to any standing reports. In other words, just avoid surprises. Next slide. Okay, we're still on authority, and this is my last authority slide. Then we'll go into something a little bit different. So, authority about communication. How does this work? As we discussed earlier, the principles for effective working relationships or all good relationships, again, depend on open and honest communication. The more effectively you communicate with the people around you, the better you'll connect and you can meet your ultimate goals together. Next slide. Now, let's talk about some opportunities for relationship building. And I've broken this up into some categories here. The first one is program standard. So again, based on FTA's oversight, observations, and interaction with our states and rail transit agencies, these opportunities for relationship building were developed based on effective and best practices we've observed or what we have provided technical assistance to. And you can see to the right, the principles of effective working relationships. And if you apply these recommendations, you will ultimately meet the goals of those principles of effective working relationship. So for program standard, here are some recommendations. For the program standard, the State Safety Oversight Agency should allow its RTAs to review the program standard before it's final. You don't want, as a state, you don't want, and you should never just provide your program standard to your rail transit agencies and state, here it is, this is what you must do, although there are requirements. But allowing your RTA to review the program standard and provide comments is very important. And this is not only when you submit your program standard on an annual basis, but this is for any updated or ad hoc changes made to your program standard. The next bullet states SSOA should consider RTA's comments to the program standard. Now, when you as the state provide the program standard to an RTA to review for comment, the SSOA should consider those comments. In some cases, challenges to the SSOA process could be based on RTA's resources, labor union, or issues outside the RTA's control. And if the state is aware of these things, then as I said earlier, you can work on the how to get to the requirements. And the next bullet there is the SSOA should provide a disposition of the RTA's comments prior to finalizing the program standard. Again, working together. If the RTAs provide comments to a state based on their review of a program standard, it is just recommended that the state follows up with the RTAs and state the disposition of those comments so that there is not any concern of what happened to my comment. Did you hear me? Again, this goes to open communication. Did you hear me? What happened to the comments? And in most cases, being honest, a lot of the comments that a rail transit agency may provide may be restricted because the state must follow the required rules. But again, relaying that information to the rail transit agencies is important. And then the last bullet here under program standard is have the RTA as a signatory of the program standard. Again, this is not for the RTAs to sign because they approve the program standard, but at least acknowledging the program standard. This will show that the RTAs had an opportunity to review the program standard, comment on the program standard, and receive disposition about the comments that they provided. Next slide, please. Again, opportunities for relationship building as it relates to policies. The SSOA and RTA should be familiar with all related safety policies, meaning the RTA and the SSOA should be familiar with all local, state, and federal laws referencing the program standard and the Public Transportation Agency Safety Plan and the activities developed to carry out those functions. If there's any confusion about the policies, both parties should meet to go over to ensure that there's mutual understanding. Make sure that you're on the same page. If the parties cannot come to a mutual understanding, request FTA's technical assistance. If there's any confusion on policy, you can visit the FTA's website for reference, or you can contact the FTA program manager responsible for your state to put you in contact with the appropriate individuals or offices. In some cases, FTA may set up a meeting to go over your areas of concerns. And the SSOA should have an open discussion to explain reasons and purposes of new policies. In most cases, policy updates occur because of local, state, and federal rules. In some cases, updates may occur based on the outcome of an SSOA's oversight activity, such as corrective action plan disposition. If a CAP required an RTA to create a new policy or guidance, then the new direction may be reflected in that program standard. Next slide, please. Keeping with the opportunities for relationship building, under reporting requirements. All reports, such as audit reports, investigation, status, annual, etc., should have a clear reporting requirement. These requirements or processes should include what the report is, why the report is required, where the report should be submitted, how it should be submitted, and when it should be submitted. Another factor to consider for reporting requirement is the determination of the report. Is this an internal report or will it be made public? These requirements should be based on the state safety oversight legislation and processes outlined in the program standard. Reporting requirements should have a defined process with clear and agreed upon timelines when possible. As previously mentioned, when the report is to be issued, it is important and should be negotiated on the time when outside regulatory policies or requirements. For some reports, it is a requirement based on the rule itself. Next slide. My last slide for opportunities for relationship building deals with communication. It is recommended that you establish a communication protocol. What does this mean? Basically, from the state to the rail transit agencies, you should have a protocol for how you elevate or escalate your communication. For example, a state safety oversight program manager should have direct line of communication with the rail transit agency's chief safety officer and the accountable executive when necessary. The next line of supervisor from the SSO program manager should have direct access to the accountable executive and the RTA board of directors when necessary. And the executive, meaning the secretary, commissioner, or director of the SSOA, should have direct communication with the RTA's accountable executive and the board. These clear lines of communication should assist and prevent multiple people from providing directions or responses. Then establish routine meetings for oversight activities. Many disagreements between SSOAs and RTAs may stem from audit, investigation, and inspection findings by the SSOA. A best practice to address these situations is by discussing the potential findings prior to making them final. This allows both parties to discuss the potential findings and present any clarification or missing elements. Another opportunity to stay on the same page when it comes to SSO oversight is by having routine meetings to discuss oversight activities. These meetings may include CAP meetings to go over existing CAPs to potentially close them out, discuss reasons for extension, closing or rolling a CAP into a new finding, or to simply negotiate what may be required to address the issue. As part of a best practice another part of best practice is for SSOAs and RTAs to have quarterly meetings to go over the entire body of oversight activities and potential concerns. For some SSOAs and RTAs that may have issues or concerns that just cannot be resolved, then we've seen them hold what they've referred to as workshops or conferences to go over those requirements and deliberate on remedies to address whatever their concerns are. All in all, whatever your subject matter, having established touch points will enhance your program as well as your relationship. If you simply rely on emails, official correspondence to resolve your issues, the message may get lost in translation or lack thereof. There's nothing like face-to-face or screen-to-screen conversations. Next slide. If we commit to working together and being open, trust, valuing one another's input, respect, not allowing your negative emotions to impact the people around you, self-awareness, consider diverse opinions, inclusion, and have open communication. Then you're part of an effective working relationship. Next slide. I hope this information has been value added and you can incorporate some of these effective and best practices into your operations as a state or as a rail transit agency. Thank you for the opportunity to present. So next, coming from the real world, as I call it, we have our partners from Washington State to go over real life activities of having an effective working relationship. With that said, Washington State, I'll turn it over to Molly and Branden. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate that. Good morning, everybody. It is early here, but not that early. With that, I'd like to introduce myself and Branden. Branden is Director of Safety Programs at Sound Transit, and I am the manager of the SSOA for Washington State Department of Transportation. And we're going to talk a little bit about sort of what we have found to be effective in building a relationship between the SSO and the RTA. Now, having said that, Branden and I have had the good luck to have started with our organizations at about the same time. So we weren't bringing previous paradigms with us. We didn't have a lot of baggage that we had to sort of overcome. And so I'm sure that a lot of this stuff is not going to be new for you, but just some things that we have found that have been helpful for us. Next slide, please. So what we have seen in our experience is that there are 3 different types of relationships that an operator can have with a regulator. The first one is avoidance. And this is where the SSO and the RTA don't communicate, or they communicate only good news. They have a little bit of a fear of speaking candidly out of concern for upsetting the apple cart or ruining the relationship. And generally what happens is that relationship comes before compliance. And the result of this type of relationship is that issues or potential issues don't get addressed and the risk continues to grow in an organization. The next type of relationship is combative, where the SSO and the RTA only communicate when something's going wrong. So in this particular relationship, what tends to happen is that there's a fear of speaking candidly out of concern for civil penalties or formal discipline from the SSO. There's a potential here for the RTA to hide issues or mistakes or challenges so they never get addressed until the bad thing happens, and then it's much, much worse. The third type of relationship is a collaborative or constructive. This is where the SSO and the RTA are communicating effectively and regularly and openly. Both sides are open and fearless about discussing challenges, issues, and differences in interpretation. In this type of relationship, the RTA feels supported and feels like they can take ownership of issues and the corresponding mitigations. Next slide, please. So, first rule of thumb, communicate. You've heard this before. So there are three different types of regular communication channels that we use in our relationship that we found to be really effective. First of all, it is important to communicate when things are going well and also when things are not going well. It's obvious that you need to communicate when things are not when you're having some challenging times, right? There's a problem that you're both trying to correct. Communicating during the good times, not so obvious, but it is a great time to touch base regarding strategy, improvements, and successes that you've had. Secondly, levels of formality. We have formal and informal meetings. Formal meetings are great to allow those documented conversations to take place that are so important in SMS. We have those conversations around risk, SMS functions, mitigations, plans, and status. And the informal meetings also create a space for candid conversations around challenges and also requests for support or guidance. So if an RTA isn't getting traction on a particular issue with its operational or upper management, it gives us an opportunity to have that conversation and strategize how we're going to get that thing done. And the third aspect is management levels. It is important to have both manager level and higher director level meetings within these two organizations. The manager level meetings are great functional meetings, again, documented, where where details can be discussed, intricacies of procedures, risk assessment walkthroughs, things like that. But the director level meetings help to set strategy, work out plans for collaboration, and set a joint vision for both groups. Next slide, please. All right. So, creating a collaborative dialogue. Safety communication should be two-way. So the SSO's responsibility here is really to create a non-punitive environment where the RTA feels free to discuss risk exposure, challenges, and failures, as well as successes. This means that civil penalties and formal discipline cannot be the only tool in your toolbox. And I would like to urge us as SSOs to remember that we are not the expert in the room when it comes to having conversations with our RTAs. They know their business, and 99% of the time when you're seeing an issue, they are also seeing it. But we only see through investigations and reports and CAPs only a very small aspect of what their operation is happening. So really our role is to understand that they are the subject matter experts. We assist them in understanding regulations, and we are applying interpretations consistently. That is so important. A lot of times there is room for interpretation, and we need to make it very clear as an SSO what our interpretation and how we choose to apply it in the program standard. With SMS being implemented in rollout in a lot of these RTAs, we also provide coaching and guidance on SMS implementation and functions when necessary. We support the safety team with executive leadership, which I mentioned before. If they have a mitigation plan and they need a little help getting some traction behind it, we can definitely offer that support. And importantly, we do need to acknowledge the progress the RTA is making in implementing SMS. This is a huge lift, and it is a big paradigm shift for a lot of folks. So we need to be able to look for opportunities to acknowledge all of the hard work that they're doing and all the progress they're being made. For the RTA portion of this, I'm going to hand it over to Branden, who will talk to you a little bit about the collaborative dialogue from the RTA standpoint.
Thanks, Molly. Good morning, everyone. So from an RTA perspective, we partner with the SSO to ensure that they have a clear understanding of our current and emerging risks. This allows us to partner on mitigation strategies and helps us really navigate the internal and external challenges through the implementation of those strategies. We also need to make sure that we are keeping the SSO informed on investigations, CAP items, and internal audits, especially when it comes to needed updates and development of policies and procedures. Our focus is on building a productive partnership with our SSO so we can ensure that we are on the same page and can educate each other on our respective processes and procedures. This allows us to foster a relationship where we can have candid conversations around our safety challenges and our safety processes. It's really important for us all to understand that we have the same goal, providing a safe service for the communities that we serve. And I'll turn this back over to Molly, and next slide.
Thanks, Branden. So the third and last item here is to calibrate often. The RTA and the SSO should always, always, always be checking with each other to see if the SSO's presumed risk exposure, in other words, things that we hear from the little keyhole that we get to peer through occasionally, is the same and lines up with the RTA's observed risk exposure. So in other words, the folks who have the whole picture. Any gaps between those two should be addressed as soon as possible. And to understand why the data doesn't look up. Are we applying interpretations differently? Are we looking at the same behaviors? Are what the SSO considers to be high risk the same things that the RTA considers to be high risk? Those need to be addressed right away. And also, the RTA and the SSO should calibrate with other industry organizations to source their baseline data. So there are some good tools out there to do this. And again, formal and informal. So you have things like national databases, but you also have community groups that have been extremely valuable in helping us to understand sort of how our interpretations as the SSO line up with the rest of the country. And don't be afraid to be clear about and candid about long-term strategies and goals with your RTA, between the RTA and the SSO. We all have the same goal of providing a safe service for the communities that we serve. And I always say that when it comes to negotiations and relationships, safety is really fortunate because we really do all have the same goal. And so when we start out facing the same direction. And the point here is to just remain very close to your RTAs so that you're communicating constantly and making sure you're all looking at things the same way. Next slide, please. And that is it. And we are open for questions, if you have any, or discussion.
Great, and thank you, Molly and Branden. At this time, we will open up for questions. So please post your questions in the question and answer pod there, and we will go into that. And from my office, I have my program analyst, Maisha Stephanie, who will facilitate our questions for us. Good morning, Maisha.
CEOs, governor, secretary, board.
I'm sorry, Maisha, can you start the question again?
Sure. Okay, the first question is it important to educate leaders, i.e. CEOs, governors, secretaries, board of directors, etc., within the state, SSOAs, and throughout the RTAs about the SSO program? It would be great if this education came from the FTA. The FTA can set the table to allow for productive working relationships by outlining those roles and responsibilities directly to the leaders of government leaders, i.e. SSOAs and the RTAs.
Great, thank you, Maisha. Molly, Branden, I'll take that question since it was somewhat suggested that the FTA takes the lead in that. Actually, we do that time to time. Whenever there's new leadership within a state safety oversight program, my division and as the chief, I will ask my program managers to work with that particular state to see if their leadership needs to have a briefing on the state safety oversight program as a whole. And we do that from time to time. Or again, as I said in the presentation early on, if someone is requesting clarification and technical assistance guidance, then we will set up meetings with State Safety Oversight Agency leadership to provide that. One thing to keep in mind when we have these meetings, other than the situational awareness and understanding of the program, but for technical assistance, when we're having these meetings, our role is not to advise, consult, or to direct you on what to do as a state. That is your responsibility, but we will provide you the technical assistance of going through that program. Now, as it relates to rail transit agencies, I know, it's not a perfect world. Sometimes you may not get along with your state safety oversight agencies, but we ask that you work with your state safety oversight agencies as outlined earlier to resolve any concerns that you may have. Now, if you cannot reach that resolution, then by all means, the Federal Transit Administration will meet with both of you to clarify a misunderstanding or clarification of a rule or regulation.
Okay, great. Thank you, Patrick. Question number 2 is, I wonder if it is possible to get, number 1, the current list of SSO program managers and the RTA chief safety officer, and 2, the list of participants, affiliation, and contact information for this year's workshop. Can you help?
I'll do that. Hopefully the next questions are from Molly and Branden. But as far as the context, I'm not sure who's asking for the contact information. As it relates to the state safety oversight agencies, if you go to our FTA website, transit.dot.gov, and you click on safety and you go to state safety oversight, we do have a list of all state safety oversight program managers or the heads of the state safety oversight agencies, and you can contact them from there. As a report out, in addition to the transcript of this particular virtual workshop, we will provide a general list of the attendees so that you may follow up with anyone that you've heard from as presenters or that you have seen through the chat or the attendance log.
Okay, thank you. Question number 3, relationships take time. The RTAs and SSOAs need to work with each other directly before escalating issues to executive leaders. Thank you for making that point. The principles that you review can easily be erased when that open communication process is broken. So it's more of a comment.
More comment. Well, let me ask this, and I want to pose the question based on that to Molly and Branden. You know, we talked about, well, in my presentation, I talked about these principles for effective working relationship: the trust, the respect, the inclusion, the awareness, self-awareness, and communication. And if you could just share in the chat, what do you think? All of those are important elements, but which one is most important to you? If you could share that in the chat. But to that question, Molly, Branden, about trying to resolve things before it elevates to your leadership, what do you all do to try to handle things at the lowest level possible?
Well, I think, you know, there are a few different ways I can do it. And one of the things that we try to do is when we have issues that gets elevated straight to us, one of the first questions that we ask is, has that been done, right? Have you talked to the transportation safety specialist who's working with your RTA? And how did that conversation go? And then have that conversation with those folks in the room. Because then it just, if you don't, sometimes it just turns into a big game of telephone, right? Where somebody said this and it becomes a he said, she said, and you can really understand with everybody in the room sort of what the conversation is about, but you also understand a little bit about the dynamic that's going on in the room. So we will have open conversations and say, hey, there seems to be a little challenge here. How can we resolve this at the lowest level rather than just pushing it up to the manager immediately?
I can add one thing to that is one of the things that we've really focused on, especially in terms of handling things at the lowest level, is Molly and her team are integrated into the different teams that we have within the organization. So right now we're split up into 4 different regions, and we have a safety and security manager and 4 FTEs that are assigned to each region. And so Molly and her team are integrated in with those teams and their day-to-day meetings. Not necessarily the meetings that Molly and I are having at more of the director level or the management level, but really on the boots on the ground level meetings. And so they're able to work with these individual region teams and work out those problems and come up with solutions before these issues are even brought up to our level to make any type of decision.
Okay. Maisha?
All right, question number 4. How do you handle a CEO that is dragging their feet and not wanting to work with an SSO?
I have a response, but I'll defer to our industry folks first.
I'm assuming in this case, you're talking about an accountable executive, right? So, I mean, I think that's a challenge. There are various reasons why somebody at that level may or may not be completely bought into the idea of SMS and what that means for them specifically. Hopefully, before we get to that point, the CEO or the accountable executive has had some education regarding what SMS is. And it's important to sort of, and sometimes I think, and one of the things that Branden and I really have been working on is understanding that in order to move things forward, we have to sort of divorce ourselves from the ego part of it, right? Because it's not about my personal success or my personal failures or Branden's personal successes or failures. It's about making the operation safer. And when you approach somebody at a kind of a C level, you know, things need to be simple, and you start with the simple questions. You know, how are you invested in the safety of your organization? And here are and what types of things do you feel affect the safety in your organization? And let's start with those things. I think in building a relationship and sort of bringing somebody on board, it is super important, first of all, to start with the simple things. Go to the things that you both agree on and start there. And then secondly, offer some quick wins. If that person has some ideas of what would make their organization safer, then let's try to listen to those ideas and see how they would fit within an SMS framework. And chances are you'll find a place for it. And if you offer those quick wins, sometimes it'll have an easier time bringing somebody along with you on sort of this SMS implementation journey. Branden, do you have any other perspective?
No, I think you hit it. I think that, yeah, I mean, I think it's just important to make sure that we're educating those folks on not only the regulatory requirements, but also what are the benefits of us providing, you know, a safe service, right? More people are going to want to ride our system, and that's one of the goals. So if we can not only utilize our regulatory requirements, but also show the value of what safety adds to the ridership increases, then I think that's a benefit.
Yeah. And to that point, as part of the presentation as well, having the communication protocol for escalation. Sometimes some CEO or general managers, they may not want to hear from the State Safety Oversight Program Manager. So involving the supervisors of the SSO program or the head of the state agency to communicate with them will also help in those cases. And again, you don't want to use the hammer to catch a CEO off guard. Use all the tools prior to that you can to address those concerns. And I think we have one more question, and then Dr. Ramsey will join us.
Okay. Next question. How do you communicate with an accountable executive and the board to allocate resources toward the maturity of the SMS?
That's a great question.
Yeah, it is. But let me talk some generality here on some things that we have provided technical assistance to some of our states on, and we talked with some rail transit agencies about, because, you know, it is not you against them, them against you. In a lot of cases, the RTAs really want the help from the state to kind of push certain agendas. But one of the things when communicating with the CEOs or the accountable executive and the board, states have a requirement as part of our rule to issue a safety status report to the governor and to the board or the equivalent body. In addition to issuing those reports and talking about that, we've also recommended that the State Safety Oversight Agency set up a routine cadence where you are briefing the board in person and asking and allowing them to ask any questions they may have and they can share with you whatever direction may be. So again, having that communication protocol, not only up through the accountable executive, but including the board on that as well. And that's not just for SMS, that's for a lot of other factors. Molly, Branden?
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I mean, I think that part of it is just getting to know your audience is one of them when we're talking about the board, and then just making sure that you're developing presentations to be able to sell to your board based on what the audience that you're presenting to. And I think that, I know for us, we do an annual safety presentation every year where we go over and we highlight sort of the big wins and that we've happened from the year prior. So I think through those formal presentations is how we at my organization, we update our board on those issues or wins.
Molly, anything?
No, I don't have anything to add, but I think you guys summed it up perfectly.
We do have more questions, but our time has ended here. But again, with all questions that come in, we will address those along with the transcript that we send out to all the attendees, the ones that we could not get to. So thank you, Washington State, Molly and Branden, for joining us. Back to you, Dr. Ramsey.
All right, thank you, Patrick. And all attendees, let's give them the biggest, loudest virtual thank you and congratulations, applause possible. So with that, we're about to take a 10-minute break, but first, we would like to take a few seconds to rate the session. So if we could please get those polls pulled up. For those of you who were not here yesterday, if you look to the right of the Q&A button, you want to click polls, and that's where the polls are going to appear. So let's get our first question up. All right, so first, did this session improve your understanding of the topic? Yes, a lot, yes, a little, or no. We'll give you a couple of seconds to respond. All right, and can we have the second question pulled up? The second question, overall, did this session meet your expectations? Yes, the session met my expectations. This session met some of my expectations, or no, this session did not meet my expectations. So please vote now. All right, and let's have the third question pulled up. Did you feel that the objectives of this session were met? Yes, no, some were met, or unsure. All right, and I think there might be a fourth question. Yes. Overall, how are you feeling? Excited to continue, informed, neutral, or overwhelmed? Hopefully we're excited to continue because it's too early in the morning to be overwhelmed. That's just my 2 cents. All right, so with that, let's take our break. We'll come back at 12 p.m. Eastern to start our next session. So please take some time to yourself. We'll see you in a moment. Thanks, everybody.